It would have been the first fire of 1974 in May. I got a fire call, would be south of McGrath on the Kuskokwim River. And Alan Dutton was the spotter. Again, he was no longer with us, but he was one of the greatest guys you could have ever worked for. And yeah, he ran the Fairbanks operation at that time. And we got in a Grum and Goose. There was Murray Taylor, John Culbertson, and John Rakowski, and myself. And Rakowski was first, I was second. And I forget how the other order went. But anyway, we flew to a place called Deacon's Landing, which is south of McGrath on the Kuskokwim River. And there was a cabin there, and a fellow by the name of Deacon lived there, and he was 80-some years old. His wife Agnes was there. She was probably in her 60s, but was confined to a wheelchair and very heavy. They had two, would have been grandsons were there. One we called Wes, but I found out he had more of a native name, but Wes was appropriate. And I don't know the other fellow's name. They were in their 20s. And then there was a girl named Martha, who was 14. And this fire became known as Martha's Fire, because she was the one that set the fire. But I guess they were setting fires so to burn the brush out during the spring when it was dry. So during the fire season, fires wouldn't come in towards the cabin. So we dropped streamers that they landed mostly in the water over the river, and the river has not broke up yet. It was still covered with ice. And so they had to carry us to ride the wind. They dropped us out over the river. And I remember Alan Dutton saying, I'm going to drop you over the river, and we're not supposed to, but that we have to do it. If we're going to jump it, we have to do it this way. And it was a Friday or Thursday afternoon, and we wanted to do weekend overtime, so there was no one was backing out. And before he dropped, he said, and the problem is that if you have a malfunction, and we only jumped at 1,200, 1,500 feet in those days, if you have a malfunction, you don't have time to make many corrections. And so you would have ended up landing on the ice or through the ice, depending on what happened. And I remember asking him, what happens if we land in the river? And he just looked at me, just matter of fact, he said, do the best you can. And that was pretty much the way things went. You know, I mean, that's, if you were a jumper, you just do the best you can, and what happens, happens. Try to get out of it. So we drifted in. The first two of us drifted to the back of it. There was a creek right next to the house, and we drifted inland, I don't know, less than a quarter mile from the house. And then I landed in a snowbank waist deep and never had to roll over, and it was a very soft land. I just stood there in the snow. And then the other two came in, Murray and Rick Culbertson, and I have pictures of them coming in because I pulled my camera out immediately. And so we gathered a gear and we walked right up to the cabin, and of course they were out watching. And I will say, when this happened, when we flew over, this is a very remote setup. Deacon, who was 80-some years old, had never been to Fairbanks in his life. He'd only been to Anchorage twice, and that was due to health problems. But their whole lives were spent along the Kuskokwim River, living off the land, totally subsistent, not in a government housing, but a log home, 20 by 20, with a barrel stove in the middle, and just as remote as you could get. And so when a plane circled the house, they couldn't figure out what that was all about, and they were looking through binoculars, and they didn't understand the streamers, and they didn't understand what was going on. And we were getting ready to jump, and Agnes, sitting in her wheelchair, was looking through binoculars, and she saw somebody sitting in the doorway. And then as we got over the river, this person in the doorway fell out. Actually, it was an exit, but she thought they just fell out, and she was watching this through binoculars. And as she told us this later, she said, watching, she said, oh, my heart, it beat like hell. And she touched her chest like that. And then she just grinned. And I mean, they couldn't believe anybody would come from Fairbanks to parachute into their backyard to put out a fire that they had just started. So we spent the weekend with this family and this group of people, and it was, I would say, the highlight of all my Alaskan jumps. And There's so many details to that. It should be. I've always told Murray to write a book or write a story about this. I have great pictures of it, and there's some of the story I won't even won't even mention, but it had a cabin, it had a cache of supplies, it had a pile of firewood that was probably bigger than the house, or as big as the house. There was like a shed or a barn, maybe a 20 by 20 open shed that was full of moose meat drying, that they had shot moose all spring and they're drying that for the summer. They had about 6 sled dogs that were just existing. No one had a dog house. They might have, one dog I think slept under a piece of plywood, another dog had a rusted out half barrel that he'd crawl into. Very, very bad conditions for dogs. You never want to come back as a village dog. And then across the creek up on a knoll was a graveyard. And so I asked if it was okay to go up there and take pictures and look around, and it was. And I photographed the house and across the river. And I found I think it was Wes's father had just died that winter in a snowmobile accident. Likely alcohol was involved, and he was the last one buried up there. So in the evening we were sitting behind their house by these sheds, and we had a little campfire going, and they brought us a pan to heat water. We sit out there and drink coffee and tea, and then the men would join us, and we'd sit around and get stories of their lives, which is pretty hard to do if you talk to native folks, because there's not a lot of talking, there's a lot of sitting and nodding heads. But in the evening, and Johnny Culberson still remembers this very well, there was a full moon that night, and it was in the east across the river. And we watched the moon come up, and we were talking. And then as the moon shifted its light over, it kind of the light was on these grave sites had a fence around, a picket fence, and there was Russian Orthodox crosses. And the way the light hit a white cross, there were blue crosses and caskets and white ones, but the light hit the biggest white cross, and someone said, "Look," and we all turned and looked at this cemetery, about 6, maybe 4 graves, and this white cross was glowing like it was fluorescent. And as we watched that, back in the woods where we had landed, there was an owl calling. And I thought of the book, you hear the owl call your name. And it was spooky. It was really spooky. But I mentioned this in an email to Johnny Culberson this past winter, and he remembered it very well. And he remembered the stories we were telling. I've been talking about Vietnam and a few other things, and everybody was saying some pretty deep stuff, which is the way most smoke jumper fires went. And then the moon lined up perfectly, and the glowing cross and the owl hooting, and a spectacular night. So those were great moments too. And to condense the story, I took a picture of the family. The 2 boys were wearing our smoke jumper suits in front of their cabin with Martha and Deacon and Agnes. And then I made prints that winter and sent to them. And I'm sure they received them, but I didn't expect any return comment. And then many years later, in fact, this last winter, a great-granddaughter of Deacon Deacon received copies of those pictures on a Facebook page. Someone had discovered them, recognized their place, sent it to her. She had no idea who they were. She sent the pictures to the Fairbanks office. Wondered if they knew any jumpers. Of course, Murray Taylor's sitting there in the middle of it, and everyone knows Murray, and gave her his name. She Googled it, was able to contact him, send him an email, and said she wanted pictures. If there were any other pictures, she wanted to show her children and explain to them about the heritage of their family. So he forwarded him to me, and I've been in touch with this lady who lives in Antioch, and I think there's going to be future contacts too, but I have sent her 25 pictures of that jump, and I've received a phone call from her, and I think there'll be more contact in the future. So, and there's a lot more detail I'm leaving out. You'll have to wait for the book to come out.